My name is you. The first thing I heard when I opened my eyes was weeping. Women surrounded me on all sides, their faces twisted with grief, tears running freely. The doctor had already drawn a cloth over my face. He was mid-sentence, preparing his declaration, when I drew a breath and ruined his afternoon. The crying stopped. Then it became something else entirely. A surge of bodies pressing forward, hands reaching out to touch me, voices rising in disbelief. I couldn't move much, but somewhere in the fog of this unfamiliar body, something in me felt quietly triumphant. It didn't take long to understand what had happened. The memories came in fragments at first, then in a flood. In the life I remembered, I had been someone. A senior position at a prestigious company, a comfortable apartment, real influence, and Xiaolon, my boss, who had looked at me in a way that made the long hours worth it. That life felt like a story someone had told me about another person. Now I was here. The house was mud brick, the walls thin enough that the cold came through them like they weren't there at all. Outside, a village gripped by famine sat in near silence. The faces around my bed belonged to my mother and 4 sisters, all of them thin in a way that took me a moment to process. The kind of thin that happens slowly, over months, when there simply isn't enough. Their clothes were little better than rags. When the food came, dark, bitter, the kind of thing I wouldn't have glanced at in my previous life, my sisters ate it like it was the finest meal they'd ever had. I lay there and felt something shift inside me. I was the village chief here. The only man in a place where men had become scarce enough that women were sent away as concubines and land was stripped by whoever had the power to take it. Bandits operated nearby. Other villagers had apparently been watching my sickness with barely concealed anticipation, hoping I'd die so they could move in on what little we had. Looking at my sisters' faces, I made a decision. I wasn't going to lie here and accept this. I had military experience from a life this body hadn't lived. I had a modern mind in an ancient world. I had seen enough to know that hopeless situations were usually just problems that hadn't been approached correctly yet. The first order of business was recovery. After that, food, protection, and then the longer work of bringing this dying place back to life. I looked at my mother's tired eyes and made her a silent promise. When I was finally strong enough to move around, I insisted on seeing the village myself. My second sister helped me walk. My family had been protecting me from the truth during my illness. The fields were full, they'd said. Girls were marrying well. New houses were going up. All of it kind, all of it false. The reality was cracked earth, hungry children, and structures on the verge of collapse. Women in torn clothes moved through it all with the mechanical efficiency of people who had long since stopped expecting things to improve. Despite everything, they respected me. As the only man present, I occupied a particular position. Some women touched me openly, while others pulled me aside to complain about the drought conditions, each hoping the village chief might have some answer they hadn't thought of. My sisters were working in the fields with empty stomachs, their hands raw and bleeding from pulling weeds in dry soil. I couldn't stand there and watch. I went to help, and the moment I began working alongside them, something strange happened. A warmth moved through me, flowing like current through my limbs, like something from the martial stories people used to tell around fires. It reminded me of like Gaucho, a man from memories that weren't entirely mine, someone who had lifted me up and then brought me down in the same motion. The previous owner of this body had been skilled, capable even, and he'd spent his days being afraid of causing trouble, shrinking from confrontation, letting his sisters bleed while he worried about appearances. That wasn't going to continue. Then a mechanical voice spoke in my mind. A panel materialized in front of me, translucent and glowing with soft light. A shopping interface, neat rows of goods listed with prices in copper coins. Rice, cooking oil, medicine, farming equipment. Everything priced far below what the drought market would charge. I had 7 copper coins to my name, and somehow that was enough to purchase several boxes of white rice and rich meat broth. I brought the food to my youngest sister, Shining, and watched her lick the container clean. She smiled afterward in the uncomplicated way of someone who had been genuinely hungry for a very long time and had just, briefly, not been. There'll be more meat soon. I told her. I meant it. Later that day, twin sisters from nearby brought me medicinal herbs as a gift. I thanked them warmly and, once they were gone, sold the herbs through the system for 60 copper coins. A workable starting point. My plan was simple: travel to the nearby town, find goods available cheaply, and resell them at a profit. A small commerce operation to begin building something real. Word of my recovery had spread, and not everyone was pleased about it. On the road toward town, men from Shao village found me and decided I was worth mocking. They looked at my plain clothes and my careful walk and saw exactly what they wanted to see: a weakened village chief, easy to push around. They trampled our crops while they laughed. I picked up a stick. The old owner of this body had never fought back. That was the core of every problem he'd had. Bullies in this world, I was quickly learning, operated on a simple economy. They pushed until someone pushed back, and if no one ever did, they kept pushing forever. Their leader, Lut Sujing, stepped forward to provoke me directly. I hit him fast and hit him hard, and when he went down, I pressed the stick to his throat with enough pressure that the crowd went very still. Fear spread through them when they realized they destroyed planted seedlings, a punishable offense under local law. One by one, I gave them the choice: answer to the county office, or leave now and not return. They chose to leave. All of them. I understood something clearly as I watched them go. Politeness, in this world, was a courtesy that got extended to people who had already demonstrated they wouldn't abuse it. Firmness was the actual language of safety. The market town of Masan was a longer walk than I'd anticipated. The sun was brutal, the road unpaved, and I sweated through my clothes in a way I would have found intolerable in my previous life. Here, it was just the cost of getting somewhere. The drought had pushed food prices high enough to make my original resale plan unworkable. I was reassessing when I spotted a merchant selling crabs at a near giveaway price. The catch was spoiling, and he needed to move it. My system flagged the crabs as worth considerably more at the right outlet. A significant margin was sitting there waiting to be claimed. The seller was an old man named Wang Wu, weathered and worried, trying to earn enough to care for a sick father. I made him an offer and told him I'd bring him pork at a reduced price as well, so his father could have proper soup. He bowed to me with a sincerity that I found unexpectedly moving. Before I could finalize anything, trouble arrived in the form of Chin Dafa, a merchant of the powerful, well-connected variety, and his enforcer Lugan. They positioned themselves as the authority on who could buy and sell what in this market, and they made it clear they considered my presence an inconvenience to be removed. Soldiers came through and broke up the immediate confrontation. One of them recognized me as a former officer and offered water and respect in equal measure. After they passed, Lugan returned and resumed his posturing. I held my ground and went to find a quiet spot to retrieve the pork through my system, letting them assume I was fleeing. When I returned to find Chin Dafa's men pushing old Wang Wu around and kicking through the crabs I'd selected, the market had gone very quiet. Nobody was leaving. The guards had blocked the exits on Chin's behalf, but nobody was coming forward either. A tofu seller's wife nudged her husband to do something. He looked at the situation and concluded his tofu was not adequate weaponry for the circumstances. I walked in carrying the pork in one hand, my expression as unhurried as I could make it. "Who told you to trouble my good people?" I said to Chin Dafa. "You should leave." The crowd's reaction was immediate. Not relief, but a different kind of fear. This young man had clearly lost his mind. Didn't he see who Chin was standing with? Ambassador Liu had arrived. He was the temple district's controlling authority, connected to bandits, to the brothel trade, to anyone in Masan with real institutional power. His top enforcer, a man called Kuni, thick as a tree trunk, with the practiced menace of someone who had earned his reputation, stepped forward and cracked his knuckles with theatrical slowness. "Kid," Kuni said, "why are you making trouble for Lord Liu? You're asking for pain." He threw a punch aimed at my head. His arm was wider than my leg. If it had connected, the conversation would have ended there. I kicked a bamboo pole up from the ground, caught it in both hands, shook it once, and put the tip through Kuni's abdomen before he'd finished his swing. Blood. Kuni's arrogance vanished instantly, replaced by the particular expression of someone who has just been proven very wrong about something important. He staggered back, reassessed, clenched his jaw, and charged again with his water and fire stick raised high. I stabbed him through the shoulder on the way in, then swept the pole across and put him on the ground in front of Ambassador Liu and Chindafa. The market was absolutely silent. Ambassador Liu's face cycled through several colors before settling on something between rage and humiliation. Whatever I was, I had just beaten his most capable man in front of everyone he needed to fear him. He ordered his laborers forward, all 20 of them, sticks raised. Chindafa's man Lugan produced a broadsword. Old Wong Wu grabbed a pole and quietly positioned himself to help. I put him aside gently with one kick and turned to face the crowd alone. What happened next was less a fight than a demonstration. The original owner's combat training, layered beneath my own 2 lifetimes of experience, made the men in front of me feel slow and obvious. They came in groups and went down in groups. The bamboo pole wasn't a sword, but at the right angle and speed it didn't need to be. In the time it would have taken to lose the fight, I had put more than 10 men on the ground. The rest stepped back. Then they stepped back further. I walked toward Ambassador Liu and Chindafa through the clearing they'd involuntarily made for me. Old Wong Wu stared at me with his mouth open, recalibrating everything he thought he'd understood about the young man who'd offered to buy him pork. Ambassador Liu wasn't finished, though. He had one move left. A cold-eyed man appeared on the roofline with a crossbow leveled at my chest. "I've seen better fighters than you," Liu said, his voice steady again now that he had an angle. "Every one of them is under 2 meters of grass. You're skilled, I'll grant you that, but skill doesn't protect you from the law. I can have you jailed, exiled, or executed with one message to the right people. The question is whether you understand that." He stared at me like a man who had won. I asked him to let the other vendors leave first. He agreed, assuming he was watching me calculate an exit. The merchants gathered their things and slipped out, Old Wong Wu being pulled along by neighbors who weren't going to let him stay and get hurt. When the square was empty, I took the knife from my belt, lashed it to the bamboo pole, and held a 2-meter spear. Then a horse came fast down the road. The rider was exceptional. When the departing vendors scattered across the path, the horse didn't slow. It gathered itself and leapt cleanly over them, landing without breaking stride, and pulled up in front of the square. I squinted at the rider for a long moment, and then something from the original owner's memory surfaced, warm and immediate. Jiao Tzu. The battlefield came back in fragments, fighting together in the chaos of a campaign against the Turks, laughing too loud after surviving things that shouldn't have been survived. The kind of friendship that only forms under the specific pressure of shared danger. 17th brother, Jiao called, swinging off his horse with a grin that died when he took in the scene. "Is that really you? What is all this?" "Small trouble," I said. I was about to resolve it. Jiao looked at Ambassador Liu, then at the men groaning on the ground, then back at Liu with a very different expression. He put one hand on his sword hilt and pointed at Liu with the other. "Do you know what you're looking at right now? Get out." Ambassador Liu laughed. Jiao was just a garrison guard. A guard didn't threaten a court-appointed official. Not in a civil district, not when the military was supposed to stay in its lane. He said as much, loudly, with considerable satisfaction. Jiao produced a whistle from his belt and blew it. Liu made a comment about whistles not being particularly frightening. The sound of hooves came from 3 directions simultaneously. The soldiers who'd been patrolling Masan arrived in a body, and with them came the town mayor, pressed onto a horse and visibly unhappy about it. The unit's officer dismounted without acknowledging Ambassador Liu at all and walked directly to Jiao. "Captain, are you all right?" Jiao nodded toward me. The officer turned, saw my face, and dropped to one knee. "Brother Yi, my respects." The town mayor, still dizzy from the ride, found his footing and immediately slapped Ambassador Liu hard across the face. "Lidation, have you gone completely mad? Do you know who this is?" Liu, who moments ago had been certain of his position, began to sweat in a serious way. When Jiao mentioned, almost casually, that someone seemed to be displaying contraband crossbows, a significant military offense, the kind that implied preparation for something much worse than market extortion. The blood left Lu's face entirely. By the time the conversation was finished, Ambassador Lu was on his knees in the dirt, bowing and apologizing, offering me tax exemption, no stall fees, and the best market position available forever whenever I chose to come to Masan. In the shadows at the market's edge, Chin Dafa watched everything with the expression of someone quietly revising all of their recent decisions. I left with Jiao shortly after, both of us on horseback, following the official road toward the garrison camp. He told me his new commanding officer was someone I knew, Lai Kuai, once a rising star on the Turk battlefield, now serving as deputy commander of the border guard. The appointment explained a great deal about why the soldiers had been so willing to move decisively today. The camp was tense with purpose. Officers and battalion leaders moved through it with the controlled urgency of men who had fought real campaigns and found themselves suddenly responsible for territory instead of front lines. The soldiers under their command were another matter, a mixture of the very old and the very young, wearing worn equipment, looking less like a defense force than a collection of people who had been handed sticks and told to look official. Retired frontline officers were not adjusting well. I understood why. After years of war, the population had collapsed. Elite soldiers were sparse. Noble families had filled the gap by training their own private fighters, which created a different kind of problem entirely. One where the people nominally in charge of keeping order were outmatched by the people they were supposed to keep in order. Lai Kuai was in a side room when we arrived, dressed in a scholar's robes, sitting cross-legged, playing a zither. I didn't interrupt. The music was genuinely good, technically precise but not cold, carrying something underneath the notes that felt like iron and loneliness pressed together. I took paper and a brush from the table nearby and began writing while I listened. After a while, the music stopped. Lai Kuai looked at me with the particular warmth of someone seeing an old comrade after too long. "You're still pretending to appreciate music," he said. "I appreciate what's underneath it," I said. "The music just happens to be the container." A young woman in red, seated to one side, cut in before he could respond. She'd been watching me since I entered with the evaluating look of someone deciding whether to be annoyed. She wore her hair loose over her shoulders and held herself with the easy confidence of someone who had grown up around capable people and had become capable herself. "You come to the commander's residence asking for help, and you don't even bring gifts?" she said. I looked at her carefully. The memories surfaced slowly, and then I had to work to keep my face neutral. The last time I'd seen Li, she'd been considerably shorter, and I'd caught her in an extremely undignified situation behind the army encampment. She had been, at the time, the daughter of the brigade commander, a fact I had not known until after the incident. "Greetings," I said carefully. "You've grown." Her hand went immediately to the sword at her father's waist. Lai Kuai intervened before things escalated, and Li retreated to the side of the room with the restrained displeasure of someone who has been told to be patient and is complying only technically. I handed Lai Kuai the paper I'd written. He looked at the brushwork first, made a polite comment, then actually read the content. His expression changed completely. He read it again, then a third time. "Dad," Li said, reading his face. "Did he write something insulting?" Lai Kuai set the paper down slowly and looked at me with something that took me a moment to identify. Gratitude, genuine, unguarded, from a man who didn't offer it easily. "This is the second time you've helped me," he said. "I owe you more than I can easily repay." "You fought for this country for years," I said. "I've had the chance to think through problems you haven't had time to sit still long enough to analyze. It would have been wasteful not to write it down." The paper outlined 2 immediate crises and 1 structural problem. First, the drought. Even with the soldiers farming diligently, the harvest would fall short of what the law required them to produce, and starvation among soldiers was legally the commander's failure. Second, the fighting strength of the garrison was too weak to function as any real deterrent. The noble families maintained private forces that could, if it came to it, simply ignore whatever the official military presence tried to do. The third problem, the lack of any true authority over those noble families. I admitted I didn't yet have a clean solution for. Neither do I, Lai Kuai said, which seemed to cost him something to admit. With old, weak, and sick soldiers, intimidating families who've been accumulating private power for decades is fantasy. If something actually went wrong, we'd be sending for border troops and hoping they arrived in time. The booklet addresses the first two, I said. A method for feeding the soldiers and building the garrison's actual strength quickly. The third problem requires more time and a different kind of approach. Li Yi, who had been listening with carefully arranged disinterest from across the room, looked at the paper in her father's hands and seemed to be recalibrating something. Lai Kuai looked at me with the expression of a man who has just been handed a tool he needed very badly and wasn't sure how to thank the person who brought it. "Sit down," he said. "We have a great deal to discuss."